Okay, welcome everyone to our last lecture, Climate Change Communication, our last lecture of the Adaptation Planning and Practices course for Forest Carbon Management. We're so happy that you could be here today. Just as a reminder, if you want to reach out to any of us, we're always here to help you. And as I did look through the adaptation workbooks today, I see that many of you have already finished, which is awesome. But feel free to connect with us if you have questions or particular challenges that you're mulling over. We'd be more than happy to work with you on those projects even after the course. So if you don't find yourself fully ready and complete with your adaptation workbook yet, our services and our coaching is still available to you. Okay, so however long it takes you, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Okay, so today is the big day. We are going to spend a little bit of time wrapping up some of the final course details, and then we're going to launch into a pretty good lecture, I would say. We're gonna something different, right, for this course, where we're going to step aside from just the technical aspects of thinking about climate adaptation planning, and we're going to shift into thinking about what you're going to do with that information, and give you some grounding information for communicating your message about the work that you've completed in this course. Then we will present you with your homework for next week and get you on your way. So first, congratulations, you did it. You finished the adaptation workbook, the planning and practices course. You've attended all the sessions. You did it. Congrats. This has been a tremendous lift, I'm sure. And we've asked you to come every single week and we've asked you to stay on topic. And so we really appreciate you and just want to give you a little virtual applause for everything that you've done. You've put a lot of effort into this course and we've definitely witnessed that. So thank you so much. Now, when the course began, we started by outlining what you would do in this course, the 5 steps of the adaptation workbook that really help to conceptualize what adaptation planning might look like. But we got you started in this course, and but some of the key questions that you may have had when you began this course was how might climate change affect the resources that I manage, and what management actions could help prepare for those actions. We presented the framework, but it was really an open book for you at that point, was to say, well, we have a framework, but we're really asking you to step into this and to really put yourself out there, right? To really learn this process and to help answer some of these questions. So maybe before you started this class, you were a little unsure of what you were getting yourself into. But I kind of think that now, you have your footing, you're grounded, you're really well equipped to answer all of these questions. And I think you've put a lot of work and effort into this over the last 7 weeks so far that have really given you your bearings, right? And so we do expect that you'll have some cursory way of defining what climate vulnerability looks like in your place and what potential adaptation responses you could take to help the ecosystem cope with those climate change impacts, in particular as they relate to carbon. So at this point, you have probably a fully fleshed adaptation workbook and a climate adaptation plan that's totally customized and really is formatted in a way that documents all of your thinking that you've put into this throughout the course. And if you haven't been able to find that adaptation plan, just let us know and we'll walk you through how to find it at the end of today. Okay, so just as a quick reminder of the course, we wanted you to be able to practice climate adaptation using the adaptation workbook process. And, we've seen that you have been totally invested, and we hope that you do choose to use the process again. We've asked you to use your expertise and your local knowledge to apply these tools to your local area. And we've seen that you have documented your intentionality of why you would take certain actions. And we hope that you refer to not only the adaptation plan that you've created, but this process to help inform, future thinking into the future. We have shown you that it is super important to think through these topics in a really deliberate way. And I hope most importantly, encourage you to write down your thoughts. when we're thinking about climate change, we're thinking about huge changes that will happen well past our lifetime, right? And especially well past maybe our career in these positions. So by thinking through these ideas and writing them down, we're not only setting things straight in our own mind, but we're helping to set something in motion for future managers to come in after us in order to really evaluate what it is that we were trying to do. And that can help us determine if those actions were successful even decades after they've been put down on the ground. And lastly, we hope that you have gained some semblance of feeling like you're part of a community of practice. Maybe you've met some people through networking in your discussion groups or just in these classes right now. And, we want to just highlight that these courses bring people together on a shared topic and in a shared space of learning. And so you're not alone. You're not the only one who's thinking through how to do this. And we hope that you sort of see that in these classroom settings as well. Okay, so in terms of wrapping things up, the next section will be about climate. We'll launch into the lecture. But for the purposes of what you need to do next, we would ask that you would finish up your adaptation workbook to the best of your abilities. Get ready to share your story, and we'll talk more about that, the specific mechanics of that at the end of today. And then get ready to talk about climate adaptation and monitoring in this week's discussion session. So sort of jumping ahead, but just letting you know that this is the last lecture, but there are still some things to do as well. Okay, so do we have our special guests here to give a little pitch on a project that we're hoping you would all engage in?
Yes, I'm here.
Great. Hi, Katie. So we want to take a little pause and introduce some partners of ours who are working on a really cool project. And so they're going to introduce the project and then a little invitation for you to participate if you'd like. So take it away, Katie.
Yes, thanks so much. Hi, everybody. My name is Katie McGrath Novak. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about a study that we're working on over at Colorado State University. So I am a research associate here in the Public Lands Policy Group. And we're working on a study right now that looks at the impact of adaptation planning and practices courses that use the adaptation workbook. So like this one, we're funded by the Forest Service Office of Sustainability and Climate. And you can see our research questions here. We're looking at how the courses are affecting climate change, adaptation planning and implementation at a project level. What are the major barriers to implementing climate adaptive actions? And then how these answers might vary region to region or maybe by different land ownerships. So we are seeking participants to do a couple of interviews with us. So these usually last about an hour. And we're looking for people to talk to right after the course is wrapped up, so pretty soon here. And then hopefully another follow-up interview about a year later to kind of see how things have been coming along since then. So currently we're focusing on forest and woodland ecosystems. So I think some of you have projects that'll be in that field and others maybe not. But we just want to ask a couple questions. These are totally voluntary interviews, and these are different than the post-workshop questionnaires that you will be getting. So down at the bottom, you can see my colleague Nikki and myself. You'll be getting an email probably from one or both of us at some point asking you to participate in an interview. And I just wanted to kind of give you my name, give you my face, and put this project on your radar so that hopefully some of you will be willing to participate, and we would really, really appreciate it if you would do an interview with us. So that's about it. Does anyone have any questions? Okay.
I'm sorry, I was trying to get off mute, but what's the ultimate end? How do you see this being used longer term?
Yeah, so we'll come out with a couple of products and all of our interviewees will get access to all of these. So We'll probably put out a couple of peer-reviewed articles and then a couple of more practitioner-based papers. But ultimately, this will go back to the Forest Service Office of Sustainability and Climate, and it could lead to maybe improvements to the courses in the future. Yeah, that's pretty much what it's for, is just to see how these are affecting people and give that feedback back to the Office of Sustainability and Climate to hopefully give them feedback and any opportunities for improvement.
Thank you.
Katie, I'm gonna, after we move on, just make sure you put your email into the chat so folks can just directly find you if they need to.
Yes, yeah, I'll throw both our emails in the chat, and then we will be reaching out to people too. So, oh, thank you, Tim.
Perfect. Okay, woohoo. Yep, please
Thanks again.
Please support our partners in their learning. Not only will this go to the Office of Sustainability and Climate, but I think it'll have like broader impact as far as just how people are thinking about climate adaptation, at what stage of learning they're in. So it will be, I'm sure, more informative than just for program development as well. So awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more. I'll launch into what we're going to talk about today. Today, we're going to talk about climate change communication. And I'm going to, in one way or another, talk broadly about sort of those basics when you're entering into conversations related to climate change. And then Todd will help us really focus in on some of those very key questions related to carbon as well. Okay, so I think as many of you are aware, especially at this time that we're in, quite a few professionals are increasingly expected by their host organizations to think about climate change in one way or another, and to integrate that thinking into plans, documents, and activities, and actually really show their thinking along the way. So, there really is a need to not only understand how to do climate adaptation planning, which is what all of you have been doing over the course of these weeks, but also to effectively communicate that information. And, not only communicate it to people who are like you, who are super eager and interested, but also to maybe more diverse audiences who are new to the topic. So like I said, today's lecture, we'll talk kind of the basics of climate communication 101, and then we'll focus in on carbon specific questions. So just to cut to the chase, really here is the basic recipe for communicating climate change. And so I'm just going to put these out here in the beginning in case, you do fall asleep a little, but also just to cement that what I'm going to talk about is not necessarily that different from how you may approach communicating in your work, right? So, we'll dive deeper into all of these concepts and highlight those key considerations related to each of these ideas. But when we're talking about climate change and adaptation, it can feel really big and daunting, and it can feel like super overwhelming, and it can make you feel kind of hopeless because you don't want to really have these conversations. But just to put this out here, it doesn't have to be as scary maybe as you have it built up in your head, because the basic recipe is really the same. It's to meet people, it's to listen to them and to get to know them, to understand their needs, their values, their place. Then it's to craft a message, or to craft, with your time that you have with them, make it useful, make it relevant, sort of find a way to bridge what you're trying to talk about with their values and the places that they care about. As much as possible, stay solutions oriented and stay action oriented, right? For many of you, you are technical specialists, so that should be really easy for you, is to talk about those adaptation responses. But, and in the end, we're not robots. And so we need to stay really nimble. We need to stay really creative and really flexible in order to meet this diverse audience all across the board. So when we're thinking about our delivery, we can't always rely on doing a presentation or have key talking points, but we have to be really flexible in order to get that message into conversation along the way. So first, we're going to talk about just the basics of knowing your audience. Once we know our audience, then we can better help to support and empower them to make these changes, right? I didn't put this slide in here, but I have a slide for sort of how many. What I still imagine when I go to a very public place for a presentation on climate change, I always imagine sort of that, the iconic picture of like an angry mob with pitchforks and like fire. I'm like, oh, they're gonna eat me alive, especially at like a 7 p.m. presentation. I'm like, who knows who's gonna be there? But more often than not, I am actually greeted with people who are really open and really accepting of what I'm trying to talk about and are there to really learn, right? So when we're talking about this idea of communication, it's not always what you think it's going to be, right? And so the first step is knowing your audience, and there might be more there than you're even assuming. So what do you know about your audience? If you had to guess, where are they from? How much do they care about climate change? How many of you would think that your audience just really does not agree with climate change? I'm sure most of you would be like, oh, I live in kind of a hard place to talk about the topic. But the truth is that it is really complex, and that there are maybe lots of people out there like you, more people than you're assuming. So one way to unravel this idea is to really look at the research. The Yale program on climate change communication has done a tremendous amount of work in this sphere for several years to really break it down and study, how are people thinking about climate change, and is there a way that we can sort of bend those attitudes? One way that they've done this is through surveys and studies. And through those surveys, they've been able to bin and categorize the audiences based on these 6 distinct identities that relates to their belief in climate change. So you can see the most recent results here. It's from a program called the 6 Americas. And in this result here, you can see that actually a majority of people fall into this more leaning towards belief in global warming. And I would say that this is the highest it's ever been. Since we've been working in this field, we have never seen this many people in the alarmed, concerned, and cautious category. So we are really in a time where people are paying attention to climate change. There really are the fewest number of folks who are falling at that other end of the spectrum in the doubtful and dismissive category. So even though it might feel like the public is just full of deniers and skeptics, it's kind of not true. Many people do actually agree in climate change, and they do want to talk to somebody who can help to not only name it, but identify some solutions for them. Now, one thing to put into perspective is that this is a low sample size, so take it for what it is. But if you would like to look at the extrapolation of their research across the country, you can see that 72% of Americans actually do believe that climate change is happening. And you can see that, as you go from that yellow color up to red, that is the highest belief number. So you can see in a lot of places that red is sort of found in those city centers as well. But again, this is the highest that it's ever been. And I would really encourage you to go to this website and to zoom around the map, check it out by county, by congressional districts. It's a really interesting way to visualize different beliefs and different questions related to climate change as well. So one way to look at the data, which I thought was kind of interesting, is to look at the percentage of adults who think that global warming will harm who believe in climate change, and those who believe that most scientists that is happening, and that the percentage of adults who believe most scientists think global warming is happening. And this is really interesting, right? So you've got 72% of the public, they believe inherently that climate change is happening, but actually only 57% believe that most scientists agree that climate change is happening. And for folks like me and some of the folks at NIAX who do research, this is a huge gap, right? There's something going on here. There's some disconnect when it comes to communication that's just really, something's not happening, right? So just to say, when you start looking through this, when you really start breaking down this data, there are some really interesting questions that might inspire your communication. So here's the example of how that data set looks when you zoom in by the county profile. This is shown for the county that many of us at NIAX currently reside in is Houghton County. And you can see that the majority of residents actually in the county do agree with those national trends. So as you poke in by county, you can see, where is this county on the national scale, on the state level scale, which is pretty interesting. But when we look at a question like, will global warming harm me personally? We actually see that there's a huge disparity. So, nationally, we can see that more people believe that climate change will affect them, maybe fewer in the state of Michigan, and even fewer in my county. Okay, so that's not congruent. Anyways, so there's again another disconnect here where maybe climate change is feeling othering to them. It's not something that they believe in, it's something that they know is happening, but it's not necessarily going to affect them. So, go into that climate change, the Yale climate visualization data to really look at this. There just are several different survey questions that you can dive into. Now, we know that the Yale research does provide a great snapshot, but if we want to dig into this deeper and look from a different perspective in our community, we can, look at different research that is out there right now. There is research that's emerging suggesting that a slice of that general audience, being forest landowners, may be even more concerned about climate change than just the general public. So it's like sort of, pulling the onion back and really getting an understanding of who this audience is. This is older research at this point, and I'm sure there's even more studies that we could look to, but it's really just trying to show you that maybe your audience actually cares more about this issue than you're assuming. We also have information about forester perceptions, and this is based from research in Canada. And here we're showing that the majority believe climate change is currently having a significant impact on forest ecosystems and will continue over the next 50 and 100 years. And that forest practices currently implemented are generally just not sufficient enough to face the impacts of climate change. So you can see that, as you continue to dial in, people in your own community are greatly concerned about this topic. And, and maybe that's because they're spending the most time in the woods. So as you start thinking about the group that you're going to approach, really dialing in not only where they are geographically, looking at some of those surveys, but then trying to understand what it is that they like to do and getting a sense of, what they may be observing and how attuned they are to this topic. Now, when we are talking about climate change, we know that there's a distinct belief in climate change, but there's also this common disbelief that it's happening locally, right? I showed you that when it came to our county and their belief of how climate change would affect them personally. So how do we overcome that psychological distance to really make climate change feel like something that is relevant and is happening in our place? When we think about this idea of psychological distancing, how does this distance occur? When climate change impacts are viewed as distant or far off, it really is thinking about other people, right? And it can be misconstrued that it's a future problem, really, that it's happening at another place and it'll really only affect future generations. Or, maybe the distancing is such that they're only understanding it from other places. And so they just really can't understand what that would look like in their place. When we use abstract statements and imagery in our communication that really doesn't distinctly apply to our audience, it really activates that not here, not now mentality, right? So if I'm talking about sea level rise, many may say, oh, I don't have to worry about that because I live in the middle of the US. So I'm relatively safeguarded from those impacts and it's just not my problem. We know that type of thinking just isn't productive. And because it doesn't, because our own experiences may shed light on how climate is affecting us, at our own home. So just by saying like, oh, well, this is happening in Miami, those people just shouldn't live there. Well, we do have personal experiences, and especially when it comes to intense flooding events here in Houghton, in the Great Lakes area, we have experienced just severe rain events and flooding that have devastated our communities. So maybe it's less important for me to focus on global imagery when I'm having conversations with people in the Midwest, but it is important that I remind them of severe disturbances that have completely rocked our lives in this place. Disturbances that are still affecting us now, even in 2022, when this happened in 2018. And so centering people in their place is really like the first way that we can reduce that psychological distance. Next, all of you are natural resource managers and or are in one way or another very attuned to the changes of the woods. And so it's part of your thinking when you're thinking about lands to weigh risks of those, possible forest health issues, and drought and flooding. But, you very likely have a lot on your plate. And so climate change really can feel like a competing priority to a lot of people that you're talking about, especially people internal to your organization. Um, so, we know that climate change can make that work more challenging to meet their goals and harder to prioritize those risks over time. So it is important to continue to center those climate change impacts in that place in order to draw out how climate change is affecting all of those other competing priorities for people who are working on the land. Lastly, when we're talking about visuals, when we're talking about messages, we do really need to go beyond the tropes of the past. And I haven't seen it too much recently, but every once in a while you do see somebody who really goes all in on that like early 2000 imagery of polar bear and like a flaming earth. And I would say as much as possible, don't do that, and show real people, not stock photos, show recognizable places, like real things from that place that will help people like distinctly connect your message to their experiences. Okay, next, let's talk about reaching your audience. I know that there are a lot of resources out there. We've just gone through quite a few to help you categorize and understand what your audience believes and related to climate change. But it's going to be really important when we're putting our messages together to focus on a community's value, right? So if we want to have a full connection with our audience, we need to identify what they care about and then help to bridge our message to that value. Why does your audience care about their place, right? I mean, some people, they love living where they live, right? So why is it that they like living there? How can you tell a story that includes climate change and those values and also promotes action? Centering on these things that we care about is really what builds that common ground, right? And helps us to find those intersections between our values and those projected changes that can have, huge impacts to your local culture. So, for instance, if your audience is really passionate about wildlife, then consider sharing how climate change is affecting bird migrations or how longer growing seasons and milder winters may increase deer populations and intensify browsing pressures on trees and plants. Really relating, their lived experiences and showing how climate change can, change the arc of what they're experiencing and maybe go into a very different place. An easy one is if your audience loves winter sports, talk about how climate change may reduce those opportunities, and looking at shorter recreational opportunities given shorter winters. So, collectively, we know that telling a story that links our values to climate change and describes those intersections is really a great place to have a conversation, right? Really just calms people down and makes them more open to listening to you. So, as much as possible, just think really carefully about your audience. One way to learn about our audience's values is to show up and listen. Listening helps to identify what your audience thinks is important, and it can help build trust with you as the communicator over time. So you don't have to go in there and have a message. You can go in and participate and be part of this group and learn and understand, and that will help you craft a more meaningful message, but will also, increase your credibility in the community. We know that the people in these communities, they have really deep knowledges of their place, and those should all be they should all be validated, right? Their lived experiences with the land or traditional knowledge handed down through generations is just as important as the message that you're trying to convey. So, we do need to make sure that we're creating a space, and a very inclusive space, to have that reflection and sometimes that emotional connection to the story that you're telling. Digging a little deeper, it is also important to recognize that our audience has already experienced other stressors and challenges due to longstanding issues related to inequities, and climate change is really only going to exacerbate and amplify those inequities. So that those who are the least responsible for climate change are often the most impacted. So considering this in your messages as well, in urban area, tree cover is often sparsest in socioeconomically disadvantaged and historically racially segregated neighborhoods. We need to be clear about that, and and to not avoid having some of these conversations. It's important to not overlook the root of these issues, and to make sure that we're integrating the past with the present and the future in our stories, so that we are engaging our audience on this topic, and really inclusively bringing the community closer to a solution, and not disregarding that this is happening in one way or another. As much as possible, we do need to avoid fear and blame and shame in our messaging. The climate is changing, and we do need to talk about it. And this conversation is just never going to stop being hard, right? It's super overwhelming. But when we talk about the issue, it can break down an isolated, powerless feeling that a lot of people do feel. So our roles are really, as communicators, is to offer support, and it's to help to shift that group out of grief, and to demonstrate how we can take those tangible actions to overcome challenges, and get to a place where we have some level of a solution. This is really important because it can help build empowerment in the community that can lead to action, and it can truly motivate people to take action in one way or another. So in summary, avoid assumptions that can lead to blunders. Learn about your audience. Ask who you're talking to, who will be there, what do they want to know. Spend time researching local issues and learning about them. And be respectful of your opportunity to share knowledge and deliver information, because a lot of people are there because they're truly curious, right? But always do your homework to understand where they're coming from, to make sure that your messaging has that greatest impact. Okay, so shifting into developing climate narratives. First, be a credible messenger. I think in this course, we've provided you with quite a few, unbiased scientific, uh, resources and literature, and just really foundational pieces of information that can help you draw from when you're looking to create meaningful climate change messages. Start with that unbiased scientific research. There are so many misconceptions about climate change that it is, it's a minefield. So having a better understanding of where this information comes from, presenting that, can help to sort out the myths from the facts, right? For general audiences, minimize delving into incredibly scientific research is going to be your first gut check, but also highlighting resources that are truly accessible, like to the general public, such as the National Climate Assessment, which is written for the national general public to read. So these are fantastic resources that will be updated in 2023, but are still very relevant as they were the day they were published. So start there if you are looking for some general key messages. Next, support your messaging with facts and statistics, but be sure to break down that research to make it relevant, right? Share real science, share the full range of plausible futures, but also acknowledge that we know through observed trends, data sets, and experiences some things, but we don't know other things as well, right? So include uncertainty into that. And finally, be sure to pull all this information into a way that sort of is a little bit of a pitch that can help to resonate and to locally connect the dots. So we don't want to just like throw up graph, 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 graph and expect that our audience will be able to interpret that, especially on the fly. So we'll want to put all of this together into some, context for them. So if we have warmer winters, that are less severe and shorter, and maybe an earlier spring, this will have an effect on shifting plant hardiness zones. And so maybe you would present the range of changes that could happen because of that climatic shift. So with shorter winters and earlier green up, you may result in better growing conditions for native species. With a shift in plant hardiness, we may be able to plant species we can't usually grow up here, but longer growing seasons may also bring about drought and increased opportunities for invasive species and pests. So really, summarizing this, talking about things that your audience cares about, but then, collecting those ideas and moving them closer to action is what we're trying to get you to do. When we're presenting our climate narratives, we do need to present data that does include uncertainty. And so we know that uncertainty is included in everything that we do. We really truly don't have a crystal ball. And I think everyone knows that, right? We do, but we do also live in an uncertain world, and all of us are very we're very accustomed to following daily weather models. We drive. we commonly interpret and understand risks in our daily lives. So don't be afraid to introduce uncertainty is what I'm trying to say. So we want to validate this uncertainty and really, in one way or another, just show them the science and really try not to say that things definitely will happen by a certain date or even say that it will happen, right? Because the science doesn't support that. So what I'm trying to get here is to say, it's okay to present a range of years to show that full range of time that the models are projecting. Sometimes I see somebody, they'll say, oh, in 2072, this event will happen. And it's like, there's no way that that's going to happen. But present that full range. The next is it's really common to see people be extremely definitive about those changes. We know that models are riddled with uncertainty, so just stick with the if and may statements or projected to rather than saying something will happen. So after you've looked at the data, after you've put together your messages, do a gut check on how specific you can get. So when we introduce the idea of regional climate change impacts, we do want to narrow it down so that they can have they can conceptualize what that might mean locally for their audience and try to be, as less vague as possible in our messaging. So to, whatever degree you're able to do that. So instead of just showing a huge national map, maybe we want to show a picture that would illustrate what we're trying to say here. So in this statement, we expect that within the next 20 years, we will see a 10 to 20% increase in 3-inch rain events, which could result in up to X% soil loss. I broke my rule here. I should have said may. But you can see what I'm driving at here is to really paint that clear picture, present the uncertainty, and then to remind folks of what that looks like. What does a 3-inch rain event even look like, especially at a site that has quite a few BMPs? Okay. So getting more into that idea of visualizing change and telling a story, this is the most effective way to move people from data and not understanding into a place where they can actually see what that might look like. Visual stories are so impactful, and especially if it does relate to something that they have experienced, maybe a major flood or a major drought. Talking about, what 9 degrees warming will look like in September is really abstract. But if you can show them, remember when we had that really severe drought, what happened to all of the trees? That was when we had severe warming. You really do want to relate lived experiences to the climate data that you're trying to communicate. But in summary, it can be really complicated to talk about all these issues, and there really is a fine line between including data that feels very doom and gloomy, and what that does is it just sort of pushes people into the we can't do anything. I've been to some climate presentations where they just overlay data and they just continue to put us into this like doom spiral, and they're like, well, just too late, all this habitat will be gone. And then you're left feeling so defeated. And you're just like, well, this is terrible, and we do know that there are terrible fatalistic aspects of climate change, and that it's in one way or another going to make people feel helpless and disengage. So our job is to make people feel like they can do something, right? Like, we might not be able to change the full trajectory, but we do have tools that can help maybe ecosystems persist a little bit longer. And that's where we need to get to, is as technical professionals, we do need to use that intellect to help provide those solutions. It's to say, yes, the climate is changing. Yes, it's going in this trajectory, and it will mean that we will impact more 100-year flood events in the floodplain area than we have previously, and that it may mean that there's longer periods of inundation. But doesn't mean that the riparian habitat is completely lost, as it was in that last example. Maybe your message paints a rosier, not a rosier picture, but a more action-oriented picture of, we can transition the system to a system adapted to flooding that is like maybe like functions like a wetland, and we can prepare for new riparian habitat farther upland. It's saying that we understand there is a cone of risk related to this climate projection, and here's some steps that we can take to ensure that the ecosystem can cope with those changes over time. These are tangible. What we're doing is we're painting tangible examples, ideas, and solutions that get people more motivated and invested in that idea, rather than just really giving up. I like that emoji. It's a very colorful pool of tears. Anyways, all of these slides, I've been going through them quite fast, but all of them will be available for you to download. And I do hope that you do check out these do's and don'ts, because it will help to give you a little bit of gut check when you're entering into your own level of climate communication. So I'm not going to read them all, but I'd hope that you'd look into them. Okay, nearing the end. When we're talking about climate communication, we do want to emphasize adaptation, making things tangible. This is what you did in your course, right? It's coming up with plausible and meaningful actions that you can take in response to a range of climate change risks. And we hope that you will use this opportunity to, learn from this course that can help you think differently about climate management actions that have win-win potential, and not only can help meet your goals, but also help the ecosystem respond to climate change. And we'd want you to really emphasize that in your communication. Talk about the act of intentional planning and careful deliberation of these ideas before you are to implement. As much as we can share our story and we can articulate these details, it's going to help move people into that I can do it mentality. And I'm going to move a little fast here. So lastly, getting into crafting a climate informed message. Why is it important to talk about climate change with your peers? Well, actually talking about, especially what you've done in this course, can be really effective in moving the needle for some of your colleagues or friends or other networks who haven't really entered into this sphere, right? It can also help you gain even more support institutionally or financially for the projects that you're looking to do, and maybe open the door for other projects, right? But telling your adaptation story is so important, just to not only communicate the key lessons of the things that you've learned, but to reach that broader audience, because there are a lot of people thinking about this, but maybe not everyone is ready to enter into the planning process to learn about how to do this and how to articulate those details as you have been. So what makes a good story? I think we can all have a really good appreciation for good storytellers. Some people may have that natural tendency, but we can all become good storytellers with practice and some pointers. And, I'm going to go through some key ideas for you to consider in your adaptation story. But they're pretty logical, right? It's like when you're telling a story to your grandma, you're going to start at a different place than you would if you were talking to your best friend, right? You're going to tailor your message to your audience, and you're going to hope that it has a logical sequence of ideas. But we really want you to emphasize the intentionality of what you did to come up with this climate adaptation idea, and include specific ideas that can help connect the dots between, where you started, what your goals were, your climate change impacts that you reviewed, all the way to the adaptation actions that you came up with. So when we pull together all these stories, it really is, it's just a few spheres. We start with place and purpose, talk about key risks, our adaptation actions, outcomes, and benefits. There really is no perfect model, but this is a logical sequence of how you could tell your climate adaptation story. And if you really need help coming up with this story, we created a Adaptation Mad Lib, which is so fun. So if you're really feeling like you just don't know how to articulate what you've done in this course or how to boil it down into an elevator pitch, I would say do this Mad Lib, because everything that you've done in all of the steps of our course can be filled in here so that you have a perfectly articulated paragraph of what it is that you will do in consideration of climate change. And this could help you as you're practicing your own climate communication. Another thing is to, look to the community. We'd hope that maybe you would want to tell your story as well. But on our website, we have, several hundred stories of people who are like you, who have thought about climate change and who are taking action. So, you could use these stories in your own storytelling, or maybe you can use these to help you craft your own climate change messages as well. And lastly, if you are really keyed up and interested about climate communication, there are some great resources out there. And so the ones that I'm showing here are from the IPCC, through the IPCC website and also climateoutreach.org. And these are really just fundamental documents on how to connect the dots of what is happening with climate change globally, and then what it means locally. And they can really provide some of the same tenets of that basic recipe that I have in this presentation, but in much greater detail. And if you haven't heard about the American Society of Adaptation Professionals, and you are really interested in this idea of climate adaptation, I would suggest that you go and take a look at what they have to offer. This is a really fantastic organization for like-minded people. What this group is trying to do is to create core principles of how to communicate on climate change vulnerability, but also an adaptation. And they have outlined, fundamental principles for engaging in that professional sphere. So if you are super interested in this topic and engaged, definitely go here to be part of a community of practice and be part of a broader sort of momentum that's happening right now across the country. And we would be more than happy to share some of their resources with you if any of this is interesting to you as well. Okay, so the key takeaways, I've sort of blasted through this presentation to leave a little bit of time for Todd, but it's really to build trust, show up and listen, help make those connections between climate change and those real life issues, such as things that affect their bottom line, like their jobs, their health, their family, and culture. Really think about your audience and try to make a deep connection in your messaging. Always support engagement with any group with some level of action and tangible solution to help reduce that fear, right? And support learning through examples. And as much as possible, respect people in their place. They will make decisions that are the best for their community. It is their place, it is their knowledge. You are a vessel, you are a communicator, but really, really allow that community to come to their own place, right? So as much as possible, respect local decision making. Okay, I'm going to hand it off to Todd really quick.
All right, thanks, Danielle. Yeah, I'll try to go through just kind of connecting some of this information to carbon in just a couple of quick slides here. So, carbon management in forests is really a new topic for a lot of people. And so a lot of people are just kind of learning about what this entails. You might be the first trusted messenger somebody's encountered on this topic. We'd love to hear from you. What are some of the questions you've been asked? Maybe it's from a colleague or a family member, or maybe it's just somebody who's interested in your work. So if you've gotten some really interesting carbon related questions, put them in the chat. if you can think of them. It would be, great to just kind of, as a community, start to brainstorm what, how do we kind of apply these principles that Danielle's been talking about. Okay, next slide. So I've given a number of presentations and done a bunch of field tours related to carbon and climate change over the last year and a half. And so I'm just going to share what some of my thoughts are communicating on the topic, and then kind of linking back to these ideas that we've been talking about today. And I saw that Sharon asked the question about, how do we address some of the criticisms that people weigh towards or put towards carbon management in the context of climate change. So the first thing is really kind of speaks to that knowing your audience piece. We know that the words that we use can help connect with people that we're talking to, but we have to also realize that they can make that connection more of a challenge. Sometimes the word manage can sort of rub people the wrong way. It can make them think about sort of a command and control mentality that might be in opposition to their, leave it alone and let nature take its course sort of belief set. And so I found that many people don't take issue with certain things like, removing invasive species or restoring damaged or degraded ecosystems. The word manage, I use it a lot. It's kind of a catch-all term, right? And it's because, like, as we go through these courses, we don't really know sort of what you might be thinking as a practitioner in terms of how you would manage your land. But when getting down to those specifics, to use a catch-all term like manage, in a way, an over-reliance on it can be kind of lazy communication. It doesn't really speak to what exactly you're doing and what exactly the intention of those actions are. So, I would think about ways that we can describe what those intentions are. Think of ways or words like restore or protect. These words, these ideas kind of link to what are the actions that we're taking, what are the outcomes that we want to get from these actions. It might be linking to sort of the health of the forest, that sort of thing. I've been accused of greenwashing when talking about carbon management and active forest management in the same sentence or at the same time. And this really is not greenwashing. This is really about being more specific and linking our actions to what we're aiming to accomplish. All right, the second point here, telling a story. So I've spoken a lot in previous lectures in this course about the importance of thinking about climate risks and vulnerability to understanding ways that we can manage for carbon. And that's just as true for good communication as it is for good management planning. It helps you to tell your story of your adaptation plan and how the actions you are taking relate to carbon sequestration and carbon storage in your project. I have some colleagues who really like to connect to these ideas of playing offense, meaning ways that we can bolster sequestration rates, or playing carbon defense, protecting the carbon stocks that we have from carbon losses through from various disturbances and other climate risks. So connecting these climate change impacts to carbon benefits really there's a lot of complexity there, right? It takes an understanding of spatial and temporal dynamics, of carbon fluxes, of understanding carbon responses to management, that even I think experts kind of struggle to grasp all that complexity. And so I think kind of ways that we can relate these ideas to things like playing offense or defense oftentimes really resonate with people. All right, and then the last thing I'll just say here is to recognize that rarely is it all about managing for carbon. It's oftentimes carbon is just one of the things that we're thinking about, one of the goals or values that we're interested. And so we can't leave out those other considerations when we're addressing questions about carbon. it's always good to connect our actions that are related to carbon management to how do they support the other goals that we have, the other values that we're looking to enhance in our management projects. But it's also really important to be transparent about where trade-offs exist. There is a lot of distrust that people have on this topic. And so it really is best to avoid jargon, to avoid overly technical terms, things that might seem like you're trying to, obfuscate the whole topic or confuse. Just be really clear about what the science says on the topic, and sort of where we're missing information. And we just need to kind of rely on our best judgment and our expertise on it. So just be really clear about sort of where, what the science says and where we just don't have the science to back it up, and we just kind of need to rely on our expertise. And that way, that's what I think the best way to build trust. And recognize there's always going to be people who are calling names, and who are going into the topic probably with sort of a defined set of beliefs and aren't really open to changing their minds about that. And that's unfortunate, but all we can do is just be as clear and transparent about our thought process as possible.
Yeah, thanks, Todd. I think we'll have some good questions to answer in just after the lecture today as well. Thanks to everyone who's been putting stuff in the chat. I had no idea. Okay, so in the last 2 minutes, I do want to go over your homework. We are going to have an awesome week next week because we're going to learn more about you. So we're going to hand you the microphone. It's going to be your opportunity to tell us your climate adaptation story. We're going to make it easy on you because I do know that some of you are still working on your adaptation plan and that you may not have gotten all the way to the end. So don't feel pressured to finish it all. Really just, give us a glimpse of where you're at. You're only going to have 5 minutes to give this presentation, so not a lot of time. So you'll only have 1 minute per slide. So focus on as much as possible as just to tell a story. We don't need to have every detail, but we're really excited for this. So your example storyline is what I showed previously. It's all of the steps of work that you have at least already thought about in one way or another. It's okay if you haven't documented all of those considerations yet, but I know you in one way or another, maybe at 2 a.m. you woke up in the middle of the night and you connected all the dots and then you thought you would write it down, you didn't. But I know you've gone through this thinking with the project that you've brought to this course. So what we have done is we've created some sample PowerPoint slides if you feel like you need that. You don't have to have it. They will be linked into the newsletter, so you can download it right from the newsletter or even in the adaptation workbook. The first slide is just, let us know about your place. What's special about this place? Put some pictures in here, make it really fancy. The next, we're going to have you just give us those top 2 to 4 climate change impacts. Tell us a little story about why those impacts are so important based on the place, the context that you've set previously. Next, give us an idea of adaptation tactics. If you don't have these tactics yet, you can just talk broadly about an approach that you're going to take, broad approach. You don't have the tactical details yet, that's okay. But if you have a detailed tactical detail, we would love to learn more about that. And lastly, sum it all up. How are these actions that you're planning to take, or these approaches, these big strategies, going to help you achieve what you've set out to do in that big vision for your project? So pretty open-ended. You don't need to feel like we're grading you, because we're not. We're just really excited to learn more about the thought process that you've been going through on your own over the last several weeks. So in the newsletter, we will provide a link for you to go to a Google Drive spreadsheet to just put your name down in one of the dates that you would like to present your 5-minute presentation. We'll use the Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday slots in order to have these presentations. I think 8 to 9 really is the max amount of time, because we do want to have some Q&A after each presentation, just really general, not anything too specific. So if a day fills up, try to go to another one. You can go to any day that you want. So if you're a Tuesday discussion session person, but you have time on Monday, go to Monday. And if you'd like to go to all of the sessions just as a casual observer, you totally can. And it will be up to the people on that date as to if we record it. If we did record it, it would be an internal link. It would not be posted to YouTube. But totally not, it's something that the group can decide on that day. Okay, so in your syllabus, you'll find all the information you need for your assignment. So summarize your project as best as you can using some PowerPoint template. Keep it to 5 slides, just so you know you have 1 minute per slide. Finish the adaptation workbook if you can. And then if you are really interested in climate change communication and natural resources, check out some of those suggested readings in the syllabus as well. Looking ahead, we have discussion sessions this week, so be prepared to talk about step 4 and step 5, even conceptually. If you're not there with the details, that's okay, but still come. And then be ready to share your story next week. So that's all we have for today. I'm sorry we went over a couple of minutes, but thank you so much.